The reason why I also think that what's going on with these craft is because in what's called UFO flap areas, there's also phenomenon that occurs, alien abduction. These things seem to have an interest that can be interpreted as malevolent, demonic, and secular researchers have said the same thing.
Now, in 1 Samuel 28, when Saul talks to the witch of Endor, asks her to bring up Samuel, you say in your book that she saw gods ascending out of the earth. Tell us about that.
Well, this is what she said. And she was, the Hebrew phrase for her was a maiden of the Ob. The Ob is a word that's used throughout both Hebrew and also even ancient Canaanite religions to describe the spirits of humans or gods or other superintelligences. It goes back to ancestral worship, where our ancestors were deified by non-Hebrew faiths, and they practiced communicating with them. When she saw this, it startled her. Here was a woman who was familiar with doing this. She was accustomed to doing this. This shook her up. This was something unusual. But
so she could see with her eyes what normal people could not see, and she saw beings coming up out of the ground.
Right.
Like walking through a solid wall.
And that's one part of what I do in this book, is I talk about how, according to Scripture, there are intelligent spirits that are bound in certain places, sometimes in the earth, sometimes they're in the sky, sometimes they're in the sea, and that under unusual or extraordinary circumstances, sometimes they can move from those points of location, as in the case of the Witch of Endor, or at least communicate, especially when they are sought out, especially when we go looking for them. There's another place in the book where we talk about the Alamantra working and some of the other intentional efforts to open a dimensional vortex through which you could bring an intelligence.
Yes, you mention in your book here a bizarre story of Aleister Crowley back in 1918. Tell us about that.
Yeah, and back in 1918, he was the head of the, I think it was called the Ordo Templis Orientis, a very esoteric branch off of Masonry and some other, illuminated forms of religion. And he had also been involved in British intelligence, a smart guy, but he became very involved in the occult. And he had an interest in performing an incantation that would open a dimensional vortex. He called it the Alamantra working. And he went through a whole series of spells and workings. And at one point he claimed that he was successful, that a rift opened and that a being came through it, which he called Lam, L-A-M. And even though this was approximately 100 years ago, the image that he drew of Lam is startlingly similar to the alien grays that people have drawn for centuries since then.
Amazing.
That is fascinating. In fact, this opens up all kinds of thoughts and questions. You're talking about a stargate being a rift or a door in time-space. And you're saying that angels travel to and fro through these rifts or doors, and that would include fallen angels, the fallen angels the Bible talks about. And that's essentially the thrust of your book. The fact that they did it, the reasons why they did it, and what they did to humanity that ultimately caused the Great Flood. That's kind of the thrust of your book, isn't it?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay.
How about that?
Well, J.R.
Now, some 30 years later,
Yeah.
after this Aleister Crowley event, the men who built the Jet Propulsion Laboratory and his friend L. Ron Hubbard opened another gate.
That's
didn't
right.
They? Tell us
Well, they
about
were
that.
devotees. They were actually students of Aleister Crowley's, Jack Parson and L. Ron Hubbard, and who started, of course, Scientology. And they wanted to go back and repeat this effort, but they didn't want to bring Lam through. They wanted to bring through the whore of Babylon. They wanted to bring through this anti-feminine, if you will, the ultimate, and have it incarnated within a woman. In fact, if you go and read the rituals that they performed, it was very much sexual magic. They had a woman who was willing to be the host to bring through the whore of Babylon. And what I think is ironic is they also claimed to have some success. In fact, Jack Parsons wrote about how on the third day of the performing of this effort, that a light came through a rift in space in front of him. Something hit him and knocked his book out of his hands. So they were definitely dealing with occultic powers, if their story is to be believed. But that was accomplished in 1947, the same year that Kenneth Arnold was flying his airplane across the Northwest and suddenly saw what has now become the classic definitions of the startings of the whole UFO phenomenon.
And then
flying
came Roswell.
saucers. Roswell the same
So
year.
you're saying that these two guys may have opened the rift and let these other UFOs through? As well?
They may have, but at a minimum, they were certainly trying to do something. And of course, Parsons went on to found the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Very much had an interest in propulsions and technology.
And L. Ron Hubbard went on to start the Church of Scientology.
Right. And of course, if you understand the Church of Scientology, there's a very powerful alien force that is involved in our evolution.
That's amazing. Well, you say here, the whore of Babylon walks the earth today. They let her through.
Well, that's what they claimed.
That's what they claim. It's a fascinating book. Hey, get it. You need to read it. It's called Nephilim Stargates, the year 2012 and the Return of the Watchers. It's available through this ministry for $14.95 plus shipping and handling. Call the phone number at the bottom of your screen and order it with your Visa, MasterCard, American Express, or Discover card, or you can buy it online at prophecyinthenews.com. Do it today. Gary?
Well, J.R., I'm looking at Tom's book, page 135. There's a question here in large type. It says, will modern biotechnology play a role in the return of the Nephilim? Now, the Nephilim being the fallen ones who populated the earth in the days of Noah. And Jesus said the days of Noah would return in some form. It would be like that just prior to the second coming.
Well, he said they were marrying and giving in marriage.
Yes.
That's what these Nephilim did when they took daughters of men.
Absolutely. Now, the question is, modern biotechnology, it kind of scares me a little bit, to be honest, when I read about biotech and transgenics and so forth. Speak about that a little bit, Tom.
Well, it's a phenomenon. I mean, Leon Cass, the former chair for the President's Council on Bioethics, immediately after serving his tenure on that board, wrote a book in which he said that we are right now standing at the gateway for redefining what it means to be an animal, what it means to be a human, what it means to be a superhuman, and then he went on to say what it means to become a god. You might remember also, following the Council on Bioethics report, that President Bush stood up during one of his speeches and called for legislation to outlaw the creation of human-animal chimeras. That wasn't so long ago. It's already been approved in Australia. It's approved in Great Britain.
Wow.
They're approving patents right now for creatures who do not have to be destroyed at 14 days. And so it seems like we're being warmed up now for what is inevitable, and that is the whole transhumanist movement. And by the way, the transhumanists are not fringe. I've been on their shows. I've debated Dr. James Hughes, who is one of the primary figures in the transhumanist movement. He's a college professor. He is a bioethicist that teaches at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut. His buddy Nick Bostrom actually earned his prestigious seat at Oxford University by doing his thesis on transhumanism. They're very excited about it, and they talk openly about opening these new modes of perception, these new human modalities, through merging our species with animal species. This thing is out of the box. The train is in motion. I don't see that there's any way we're going to stop it, and to me it's very prophetic. So, and that's part, of course, of the motivation for writing this book.
Well, let me throw another quick question at you. There's something else that's happening today, and back to UFOs again, UFO abductions. And some people say that UFO abductions involve transgenics, that is, experimentations on abducted human beings, and the people doing the abducting would be the people you're talking about, the Nephilim, perhaps.
Well, perhaps, or something related to them. Fallen angels working in league with maybe some other plan that we don't understand. John Keel wrote about that. Dr. Mack, in his interviews with abductees, wrote extensively about how he found similarities in these stories about how these beings seem to come through a rift, if you will. And they're interested in collecting and harvesting human matter, also animal matter, And Vallée, he hypothesized that this was for the purpose of creating a body